It is so good to be here, and my wife and I would certainly consider this diocese as both of our spiritual homes. Both of us found our faith again in Tallahassee, separately, at different times, but it was that finding of our faith that ultimately led us to each other and to our family that we now have. So, although my home is now Iowa, under snow, and it's wonderful to be down here, this is always going to be our spiritual home. So it is good to be home in that sense. Tonight, I've been asked to share about forgiveness. And particularly, I was asked to share on our call to forgive. And so I'm going to share with you insights that I've had as I've meditated on this over the last months. And I've asked the Lord, as with all of these talks, that He, who is now in our midst, in this place, that He speak to each of your hearts as He sees fit. The topic of forgiveness is also including the multiplication that Jesus mentioned in the gospel. Not the multiplication of the loaves, but the multiplication of the pardons. We are to forgive not 7 times, but 70 times, 7 times. We're going to talk in a little bit about exactly what that means. So, as we go into forgiveness, I was trying to think of a story that would bring a little levity at the beginning, because this is a very weighty topic. And I thought of, well, let me think about forgiveness and confession. And I bet everyone here who has been to confession has a story to tell about a confession. And I have a dear friend of mine who had a great story about confession. He was on his wedding day, before the wedding began, thinking, I really should go to confession before the wedding. And so he pulled the presider aside and he said to him, Father, I'd like to go to confession before my wedding. And Father said, oh, absolutely, that's fine. Let's go into the back room here. So they went into a back room, and he said he's pouring his heart out, and about halfway through, the priest had a panicked look on his face, and he said, oh, excuse me, I think my microphone's on. And he said all he could see were his in-laws leaving the church with his bride. In his mind, they're certainly taking her away. But of course, he finally said, oh no, it's off. It's off. Gives a new meaning to public confession. Imagine. Terrifying. But Jesus says in the gospel that what is whispered in the secret will be shouted from the rooftops. What is spoken in hiding will be known to all. In the sacrament of reconciliation, we disclose our sins to the Lord for healing and for mercy and forgiveness. As I was preparing this whole weekend, I shared earlier with the workers here, I asked the Lord for a theme besides the topics I was given. And the story that kept coming into my mind over and over again is a story that's recounted by an early church historian in the 4th century named Eusebius. And Eusebius tells a story that he says was related orally from generation to generation up till his time about John the Apostle, the beloved disciple, who is the author of the Gospel of John. And the story is this, that John the Apostle was the only apostle of the 12 not to be martyred, not to die a violent death for the faith. And the story is that he was in his 90s at the end of his life, and his disciples would gather around him for his teaching. And for the last years of his life, he would simply say, My children, let us love one another, for love is of God. My children, let us love one another, for love is of God. And he would say this again and again. And Eusebius says that his disciples once finally asked him, "Why don't you say any more?" And he said, "Because there is no more. If you do that, you've done all."